duality, you can't progress beyond it, called the Ouroboros, the snake swallowing its tail. And there on that Saturn symbol, you see the Ouroboros in the Mother Lodge of Freemasonry, exactly what the Gnostics described. And within that reality is what we call time, the great controlling mechanism, Chronos, and Saturn, the god of time and space. Now, coming from Saturn is a particular frequency, and it's the frequency that's making that storm at the North Pole. And this is Saturn, which is recorded by NASA. Nice, man. And what the Saturn rings are they're made of sound. I had this sent to me by a sound engineer. This is a ring of Saturn from a particular angle. And he said, I see that every day. That is sound. And there's a thing called cymatics, which is creating patterns purely by sound, where they put kind of particles on a metal plate, and then they play sound across, and the sound, which is an information source, makes the patterns move into a certain sequence. And as the sound changes, the pattern, the sequence, the symbol changes. And it seems the higher the frequency, the more complex the patterns. So sound is a vehicle for delivering information that creates form. And this is a cymatic symbol, the six-pointed star, created purely by a particular sound. And that's what that is, and that's why it rotates exactly with the radio frequencies of Saturn. This is a standing sound wave, and it's an eye storm at the south pole of Saturn, which is permanently going round, and will do so while the sound coming from Saturn is that sound and that frequency. There's a standing wave, looks like an eye, done in a studio. This is the standing wave of rings done in a studio, just like Saturn. It's all sound. Now, these symbols here, I got off the internet, and what it is, they're playing through really fast. You can't see what the symbols are, but when you freeze frame them, what they are, they're reacting to sound. And when you freeze frame them, suddenly you see the symbols that are appearing very fast, but you can't see with the naked eye. There's a six-pointed star in one of them. There's a hexagon. And so a symbol is an expression of a sound, and a sound is an expression of a symbol. So all these symbols and this magic square numerologically of the magic square of Saturn are all representations of the frequency of Saturn, and when they interact with our subconscious, they're locking us into the frequency of Saturn from all over the place. A sound wave creates a symbol, and a symbol generates a sound wave, although we won't be able to hear it in our range. So when you see these artistic patterns in churches and stuff, we see them as patterns, but they're actually a representation of sound frequency. So on an inaudible level, they're giving it off. And Saturn is, therefore, I suggest, a major part of the broadcasting of this fake reality, which we are decoding into a world we think is real, but is actually fake. And maybe that was the pineal gland once. And maybe now that's Saturn, which has hijacked the pineal gland. So Saturn was ringless, according to the ancients, before this great catastrophe. So where did the bloody rings come from? This man, Norman Berggren, has a long, long history, he's in his 90s now, of working in high-tech space and missiles and NASA and all the rest of it. And he wrote a book some years ago called The Ringmakers of Saturn, because when he studied pictures of the rings, he realized they were changing, and not only changing, they were being made as you looked at the pictures. This Voyager spacecraft went closest to Saturn in 1980, and then there's the Cassini craft, which arrived in 2004, and I think it's still in the area. And when he compared pictures from both of them and then compared pictures in relation to the other, he realized that the story of Saturn was very different to the one he thought and he'd been told. He said this in his book: "Several years ago, a number of folks in the astronomy and physics world began to theorizing that these rings had to be much younger than the universe, perhaps only about 100 million years old. But one pair of pictures shows a change in 5 minutes. An impression is conveyed that the latest reported measurements purport to be the true ones, when in reality all might be quite nearly correct at the time of observation, but general reluctance to accept variable ring system geometry occurs because of the apparent failure to identify a physical mechanism suitable for producing recurrent change." In other words, because they can't explain why it's changing, they'll just deny it's bloody changing. And on the pictures, and NASA has these pictures, he saw these, what he calls electromagnetic vehicles. And these are thousands of miles long, some of them. And if anyone thinks that's fantastic, that's the Earth in relation to Saturn. We're not talking about the same relationship to size. And there's loads of them on these pictures. These electromagnetic vehicles, he calls them, all over the place. Here's one pictured next to the rings by the Hubble telescope. Here's a few NASA pictures showing one of them apparently moving. You put the pictures together. Why have we never heard of these except through Norman Berggren? And then he found pictures where these electromagnetic vehicles went into the rings and all this stuff was coming out of them that were making the rings as he was looking through the pictures. They're not natural. They say the water ice and stuff is in the rings. I reckon you'll probably find that there's a certain crystal in the rings that is generating the frequency. And this is from just a couple of weeks ago. The mysteries of Saturn's expanding F-ring. Saturn's most distant ring is twice as bright and 3 times as wide as it was during the Voyager flybys in 1980 and 81. The great mystery of Saturn's rings, how they formed, why are they like that, we don't know. Well, maybe we do. There's this massive ring that was found in 2009, about 3.7 million miles out from Saturn, but around Saturn. Get 1 billion Earths in it. And I'm suggesting that actually that broadcast comes across to us. The Saturn matrix is a band of frequency which we are tuned to, and we think it's real. It's a virtual reality as described by the Gnostics. Now, I'm going to move on quickly because we want to run out of time, but the moon, as I've said before, is fundamentally involved in this. I read this book, Who Built the Moon? The evidence for the fact the moon is not a natural body is fantastic. And interestingly, what the book found was the relationship in terms of mathematics and all the rest of it of the Earth, the moon, and the sun is completely different to anything else in the solar system. And what the Gnostics said was the archons created the rest of the solar system but did not create this. The maths involved in the Earth, Moon, Sun system is nothing less than staggering. They've been put together with the accuracy of the proverbial Swiss watchmaker, the book said. That's why the moon is about the same size as the sun, almost exactly at the time of an eclipse. And the moon is perfectly placed, said this BBC documentary, to sustain life, but that's pure luck, a cosmic coincidence. I don't think it is. We never see the other side of the moon. We only see one side of it. And they say in the book, the moon is bigger than it should be, apparently older than it should be, and much lighter in mass than it should be. It occupies an unlikely orbit and is so extraordinary that all existing explanations for its presence are fraught with difficulties, and none of them could be considered remotely watertight. They've got no idea. They first of all had the whack theory, something like a Mars-type planet whacked into the Earth and bits became the moon. That didn't work out. They had the double whack theory where it came back and had another go, and so they go on. And these scientists saying here, the best explanation for the moon is observational error. The moon doesn't exist because it shouldn't if it's natural. It seems easier to explain the non-existence of the moon than its existence. And they've smacked the moon a number of times with massive explosions and impacts. And what's come from that is the evidence says the moon is actually hollow. This is NASA scientist, again, Gordon MacDonald. it would seem that the moon is more like a hollow than a homogeneous sphere. This man from MIT said the lunar orbiter experiments had vastly improved knowledge of the moon's gravitational field and indicated a frightening possibility that the moon might be hollow. The moon is inside out, said this duality, you can't progress beyond it, called the Ouroboros, the snake swallowing its tail. And there on that Saturn symbol, you see the Ouroboros in the Mother Lodge of Freemasonry, exactly what the Gnostics described. And within that reality is what we call time, the great controlling mechanism, Chronos, and Saturn, the god of time and space. Now, coming from Saturn is a particular frequency, and it's the frequency that's making that storm at the North Pole. And this is Saturn, which is recorded by NASA. The symbol changes. And it seems the higher the frequency, the more complex the patterns. So sound is a vehicle for delivering information that creates form. And this is a cymatic symbol, the six-pointed star, created purely by a particular, creating patterns purely by sound, where they put kind of particles on a metal plate, and then they play sound across, and the sound, which is an information source, makes the patterns move into a certain sequence. And as the sound changes, the pattern, the sequence, nice man. And what the Saturn rings are they're made of sound. I had this sent to me by a sound engineer. This is a ring of Saturn from a particular angle. And he said, I see that every day. That is sound. And there's a thing called cymatics, which is